The fluorescent lights in the emergency room were unbearably bright, casting a cold, almost sterile glow over everything they touched. Their hum blended with the distant beeping of heart monitors, forming a mechanical rhythm that made Julia's chest tighten every time it reached her ears. She stood frozen beside the automatic glass doors as they slid open, letting in a rush of frigid night air, along with the paramedics pushing the gurney. And on that gurney was her son. Lucas lay motionless, a pale sheet tucked under his chin, his small hands limp at his sides. His eyes were closed, lashes trembling slightly, as though he were trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His head was wrapped tightly in gauze, the white layers already stained by a dull shadow near the back, right where she had thought he just had a little bump. His chest rose and fell, shallow and uneven, struggling for each breath. Move, move, pressure's rising. One paramedic barked. Checking the monitor snapped to Lucas's finger. Julia tried to step forward, but her legs wouldn't respond. Her knees trembled as if the strength had been sucked from her bones. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She couldn't feel her fingertips. Someone called her name, maybe a nurse, maybe no one at all. She couldn't tell anymore. All she could see was the tiny frame of her 10-year-old boy being wheeled away from her, swallowed by the blinding white corridor. A doctor in blue scrubs jogged alongside the gurney. He pulled off his gloves with a firm snap and turned briefly toward her. "Ma'am, please follow me. We need your consent immediately." His words were clipped, urgent, leaving no room for hesitation. Julia forced her feet to move. She followed him, barely aware that she was holding her breath. The doctor led her into a small consultation room, its walls bare except for a faded diagram of a human brain. The smooth metallic surface of the table reflected her own terrified face back at her. She looked like a ghost. Eyes wide, hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, lips trembling. The doctor placed a scan on the table, an MRI image. A dark mass occupied a section of her son's brain, something foreign, wrong, monstrous. "We found a tumor pressing against critical areas of Lucas's frontal lobe," he said. "The swelling is severe, and whatever is happening, it's progressing extremely fast." Julia swallowed hard. A tumor? But he just had a bump on his head. Just a little swelling. It was nothing. It was nothing. The doctor shook his head slowly. It was never nothing. Her world tilted. "We have to operate now," he continued. "If we wait even another hour, the pressure inside his skull could rise beyond what his brain can tolerate. This is life-threatening." Julia stared at the forms he slid toward her. Her hands hovered helplessly above them. It felt like the room was shrinking, the walls tightening around her chest. The air was too thin. Her heart was too loud. "What are his chances?" she whispered. The doctor hesitated just long enough for her heart to fracture. "We'll do everything we can. But I need your signature." Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Her trembling hand gripped the pen. She scrawled her name, though she barely recognized the chaotic lines of ink as her own handwriting. When the doctor hurried out, she pushed through the swinging doors into the hallway again, just in time to see Lucas being rushed through another set of double doors toward the operating theater. A nurse stopped her with a soft but firm hand on her shoulder. "You can't go in there, sweetie." Julia shook her head weakly. "Please, he needs me." The nurse's voice softened. "He's in the best hands right now, I promise." But promises meant nothing when her baby's life hung in the balance. Through the small rectangular window in the OR doors, she caught one last glimpse of him. His little body surrounded by machines, masked doctors positioning equipment, bright surgical lights descending like moons over him. Lucas looked impossibly small beneath them, like a fragile bird lying beneath a sky too heavy, too uncaring. Julia pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's right here." The doors closed completely. The view vanished. She staggered backward and collapsed onto one of the plastic waiting room chairs. A paramedic walked past, the squeak of rubber soles echoing down the corridor. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. A TV hanging in the corner played an ad about home insurance in a cheerful voice that felt painfully wrong for this moment. Julia covered her mouth with both hands, choking back sobs. Every breath felt like it might shatter her ribs. Every heartbeat felt like a punch. She wanted time to rewind. 6 days, 7 days, any amount of time back to when Lucas first said, "Mom, something feels weird on my head." Her mind screamed the same words over and over. Why didn't I take him in? Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I listen? The doctor's voice echoed relentlessly in her head. "If we wait, even another hour." She squeezed her eyes shut. Please save him, she whispered into the empty room. Please, please save my baby. 6 days earlier, the morning sun spilled through the living room window, bathing the beige carpet in soft golden light. Julia sat on the edge of the couch, sipping lukewarm coffee while sorting through emails on her tablet. The air smelled faintly of toast and peanut butter. Outside, birds chirped. The world was perfectly ordinary. "Mom," Lucas called from upstairs. His voice was chipper, slightly muffled. Julia barely looked up. "Yeah, honey?" she called back. "I've got something weird on my head." She frowned, stood up and climbed the stairs with her coffee in hand. Lucas was in the bathroom, leaning toward the mirror, parting his hair awkwardly. His 10-year-old frame was still lanky, all elbows and knees, but his face had started to take on the first signs of maturity. He'd lost that baby roundness just this past year. He turned slightly to show her the back of his head. "Right here. It feels kinda lumpy," he said, using 2 fingers to prod at a small bump near the base of his skull. "Like a zit or something." Julia set her mug on the counter and leaned in. The lump was small, maybe the size of a grape. Slightly raised, not red or oozing. Just a little firm. Probably just a sebaceous cyst. "It happens sometimes when your pores get clogged," she said casually. "Did you hit your head recently?" Lucas shook his head. "Nope, it just kind of showed up." "Does it hurt?" "Only when I touch it." Julia ran her fingers over it again. It didn't feel dangerous. No discoloration, no signs of infection. She smiled and kissed the top of his head. "You'll live. Let's keep an eye on it, okay?" Lucas grinned, shrugged, and ran downstairs for breakfast. He had a science project due and a soccer scrimmage that evening. Julia returned to her tablet, pushing the thought from her mind. That afternoon, the house buzzed with errands. Julia dropped Lucas off at school, stopped by the dry cleaners, picked up bridesmaid shoes for her sister's upcoming wedding, and fielded a work call that ran longer than expected. She didn't think about the bump again until later that night, when Lucas came into the kitchen rubbing the back of his head. "It feels bigger now," he said. Julia looked up from her laptop, squinting. "Let me see." She inspected it again under the kitchen light. It did look a bit more swollen, nothing alarming, but maybe the size of a walnut now. She got a warm washcloth and held it gently against the bump. "Probably just some inflammation," she said. "We'll keep doing warm compresses, and I'll get some antibiotic ointment tomorrow, just in case." "Can I still go to practice?" he asked. "Sure, as long as you're feeling okay." Lucas nodded, grabbed a granola bar, and headed for the door with his cleats in hand. That night, after dinner, Julia scrolled through Google typing in phrases like lump on child's head, sebaceous cyst children, when to worry. She skimmed through the results. Non-cancerous, common, usually harmless. She breathed a sigh of relief and closed the browser. Her gut didn't ping with fear, just mild concern. Besides, Lucas wasn't running a fever. He was eating fine, laughing, doing his homework without being told. It didn't seem like an emergency. The next morning, Lucas complained of a headache. "It kinda hurts when I sit up," he said, frowning. Julia handed him a children's Tylenol and poured him a bowl of cereal. "Maybe you didn't sleep well. It's probably stress. You've been working hard on your project." Lucas nodded slowly, but he didn't eat much. His cereal went soggy in the bowl. Later that day, at school, his teacher called. "Hi, Mrs. Gardner. I just wanted to let you know Lucas seemed off today." He was quiet, said his head hurt, and during reading time he kind of zoned out for a bit. Julia hesitated. "Did he fall or anything?" "No, nothing like that. He just seemed slower than usual." That evening she sat beside him on the couch, placing her hand gently on his forehead. No fever. He watched cartoons but barely laughed. "You feeling okay, kiddo?" she asked. Lucas nodded, but his eyes were distant. By the third day things began to tilt. Lucas woke up complaining of blurred vision. "I keep seeing double," he said, rubbing his eyes. "And the bump's even bigger." Julia examined it. It was now clearly swollen, pressing out beneath the skin like a bulge. She felt unease stir in her stomach, but she brushed it aside. "Maybe you slept wrong," she said. "If it's not better by tomorrow, we'll go to urgent care, okay?" Lucas didn't argue. That scared her more than if he had. He always argued. That night, as he brushed his teeth, he said something strange. "Mom, if I die, would you bury me next to Grandpa?" Julia froze. "Lucas, that's not funny." I'm not joking, he said, mouth full of toothpaste. I had a weird dream. There were bright lights and I couldn't move. And someone was calling me. She laughed nervously and ruffled his hair. You've been watching too many spooky shows. But later, alone in her bedroom, Julia lay awake, the ceiling fan ticking overhead, her mind chewing on his words. A bump, a headache, blurred vision. And now, dreams about dying? Still, the next morning came, and Lucas seemed better. He ate toast, told a joke, played with the dog. Julia exhaled. Must have been nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not at all. On the fourth morning, Julia woke up to the sound of Lucas scratching his head in the hallway. The rhythmic rasp of his nails dragging across his scalp pulled her instantly out of sleep. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and found him standing outside her bedroom door, his hair tousled, his pajamas wrinkled. It itches, he murmured. It really itches, Mom. Julia guided him into the bathroom, turned on the light, and brushed his messy hair aside. The bump was bigger now, noticeably bigger. The skin around it looked tight, slightly shiny, as if stretched from the pressure beneath. She felt a flicker of worry, quick and sharp, but she swallowed it down. It's probably filled with fluid, she said, keeping her voice calm. Sometimes these things swell before they go down. Can you pop it? Lucas asked. No, she said quickly, almost too quickly. No, honey, we don't pop things on the head. It's not like a pimple. He looked disappointed but nodded, lowering his gaze. She handed him a warm cloth and instructed him to hold it against the bump while she made pancakes downstairs. A harmless routine gesture, a comforting ritual, something normal. Normal felt safe. Normal felt like control. But Lucas didn't keep the warm cloth on for long. When Julia wasn't looking, he returned to scratching. The itch was too deep, too consuming, as if something inside the lump kept tugging at him from beneath the skin. He scratched until the skin reddened, until the edges of the bump felt tender under his fingernails. Later that day, Julia stood in the bathroom again, holding a small tube of over-the-counter antibiotic ointment she'd purchased that morning. She squeezed a bit onto her fingertip. This will help with the swelling, she said, though she wasn't sure anymore. Lucas winced slightly as she dabbed it onto the bump. It stings, he whispered. That means it's working, she replied, even though the thought barely made sense. He gave her a half-hearted smile and left the bathroom. Julia stared at the closed door for a long moment, a knot tightening in her stomach. Something about this didn't feel right, but there was no fever, no redness spreading beyond the bump, no alarming discharge, and she had checked for infection signs online. Everything kept pointing to something harmless. But then again, what if? She shook her head. She had a wedding to help plan, a presentation at work, a house to keep in order. She couldn't spiral into worst-case scenarios over a bump. That afternoon, while packing leftover birthday decorations in the garage, Julia heard a small cry from the kitchen. Ow! She rushed back inside. Lucas sat at the table pressing a napkin to the back of his head. A small spot of blood stained the fabric. What happened? She asked sharply. I scratched too hard, he admitted, lowering the napkin. A tiny crescent-shaped break in the skin marked the bump. I couldn't stop. It feels like there's something inside. Julia forced a smile. Sometimes cysts feel like that, like pressure building up. Is it gonna pop? He asked again, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. No, she said more firmly this time. Please stop touching it, honey. You'll make it worse. He nodded, but his hand twitched as if resisting the urge to reach back again. At dinner, Lucas barely touched his pasta. He sat quietly, head lowered, occasionally closing one eye to focus on his plate. You okay? Julia asked. I see 2 forks, he whispered. The words pierced her heart. She put down her own fork, staring at him. For how long? Since lunch, he said. But sometimes it goes away when I blink a lot. Julia felt a chill race down her spine. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you, he said softly. And I didn't want to miss soccer. She reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers felt cold. Too cold. Lucas, if you see double again, you tell me right away. Deal? Deal. When he went upstairs later to shower, Julia remained at the table long after the dishes cooled, staring blankly ahead. Something inside her was screaming now, an instinct pushing against the wall of excuses she'd built. But she still clung to the belief that it was an infection or inflammation, nothing severe. She didn't want to admit fear. Fear was messy. Fear demanded action. And action meant a doctor's visit, CO pays, blood tests, missed work, follow-up appointments. She couldn't manage that right now, not with everything piling up, but the decision to wait, the smallest mistake, was already shaping itself like a shadow creeping silently across the floor behind her. The next morning, the bump looked even larger. Julia compared it to a photo she'd taken on her phone 2 days earlier. The difference was undeniable. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Only sometimes," Lucas said. "It hurts more when I bend forward." Julia closed her eyes for a moment, pain increasing with position. A bad sign. A sign she had read about but ignored. She dressed him, packed his lunch, and drove him to school anyway. She almost turned the car around twice. She almost kept him home. She almost dialed urgent care. But each time she told herself the same comforting lie. If something was really wrong, it would look wrong. At noon, the school nurse called. Lucas had come in complaining of dizziness. Julia told them to let him rest in the cot, give him water, and she'd pick him up after classes. He seemed fine when she arrived, pale but smiling. He insisted he wanted to finish his project for science class. That night, while Lucas colored posters for his project, Julia noticed something subtle but deeply alarming. He was using his left hand to color, not his dominant right hand. "Why aren't you using your right hand?" she asked. "It feels sleepy," he said, "like pins and needles." He shook his arm, irritated. "It keeps happening." Julia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Numbness, tingling, weakness, these were not cyst symptoms. She knelt beside him, holding his wrist gently. "Lucas, does it hurt?" "No, it just feels weird. Like it's not mine." He shrugged, oblivious to the terror in her eyes. Julia excused herself and hurried into the hallway, leaning against the wall as her breath quickened. She pressed a hand to her chest. This was no longer normal. This was no longer just a bump. But instead of rushing to the hospital that night, she convinced herself to wait until morning. Morning felt safer. Morning felt logical. She could leave work early, take him to urgent care, get a scan if they deemed it necessary. She tried to cling to that plan, repeating it in her mind like a mantra. She checked on Lucas one last time before bed. He was asleep, breathing softly, his hair splayed across the pillow. The bump beneath his hair seemed to rise like a small hill, unnatural, wrong, frightening. Julia whispered into the darkness, "Just let him be okay until morning." But morning would come with a terror she could never have anticipated. The mistake had already been made, and it was growing, silently, beneath her son's skin. Day one began like any other, wrapped in the illusion of routine. Lucas sat quietly at the kitchen table, poking at a piece of toast with the edge of his fork. He barely touched his orange juice. Julia, half distracted by emails on her phone, glanced up and offered a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" Lucas shrugged. "My head hurts a little." Julia frowned. "Still, yeah. It's weird. It hurts more when I lay down." She set her phone aside and gave him her full attention. "What kind of hurt? Like sharp? Dull?" Lucas considered it. "It's heavy. Like it's pushing from the inside." Her pulse quickened slightly. She tried to keep her voice neutral. "We'll get it checked, okay? Today?" He nodded, not seeming worried. But deep down, something in Julia's chest twisted. A headache that worsens when lying down. That was new, and not normal. Still, she made breakfast. Still, she let him go to school. Still, she promised herself they'd go to urgent care after lunch. But the day passed, and she didn't take him. Day 2. The morning started with Lucas rubbing his temples. "It's worse today," he murmured. Julia stood behind him and checked the bump again. It hadn't changed much in size, but now the surrounding skin was slightly warmer. No fever, but definitely inflamed. Lucas tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I was going to say something, but, He paused, confused. "What, honey?" He looked at her, frustrated. "I knew what I wanted to say, but the words didn't come out right." Julia crouched beside him. "You just forgot the word?" He shook his head. "No, it was like I couldn't make my mouth say it." She stared at him. Numbness. Language disruption. Those weren't signs of a benign lump. She Googled again when he wasn't looking. Speech problems, cognitive delay, neurological symptoms. Words like tumor, pressure, and brain swelling began surfacing. She closed the window and told herself she was just being dramatic. At dinner, Lucas barely spoke. When he did, it came in fragments. Mom, I saw lights today. What kind of lights? He squinted. Floating lights. Like sparkles. And buzzing, too. Julia's stomach flipped. That night he vomited. No warning, no fever, just sudden violent vomiting that left him curled over the toilet. Julia wanted to scream. But she held it in. She cleaned him up, tucked him in bed, and promised herself, again, she'd take him in the next morning. But the next morning didn't get better. Day 3. Lucas stood in the hallway, confused. His shirt was backward, and his shoes were mismatched. What happened, kiddo? Julia asked gently. I couldn't remember which ones were mine, he said, blinking slowly. He had worn the same shoes for months. Later at breakfast he spilled milk and didn't seem to notice. His fork slipped from his hand twice. Julia watched him like a hawk now. Every twitch, every blink, every pause sending alarms through her mind. He looked up at her suddenly, eyes wide. Mom, why are there 2 of you? Her heart stopped. What do you mean? There's, like, 2 of everything. He held up his hand. I see double. Is that bad? She grabbed her keys. They were going. Now. She didn't care about appointments or schedules or errands anymore. But Lucas begged. Please, Mom, not today. We have the science fair. My volcano's ready. I practiced my speech all week. And Julia, tired, overwhelmed, clinging to normalcy, gave in. Okay, she whispered. After school. I promise. She never forgave herself for that choice. Day 4. The double vision was worse. He walked into a wall by accident. Not hard, but enough to jolt him. He began mumbling in his sleep. Words Julia couldn't understand. In the afternoon he lashed out at the TV remote when it didn't work. Something so unlike him that it startled her. What's wrong? She asked. I hate this stupid thing, he yelled, throwing it across the room. Julia froze. Lucas had never raised his voice like that. Not to her, not to anyone. He burst into tears moments later. I don't know why I'm so mad. Everything feels loud. My head hurts. I don't feel like me. That night, she sat beside his bed while he slept, her hands clenched in her lap. His breathing was shallow. His skin pale. The lump, more pronounced now, throbbed beneath the skin, pulsing almost in sync with his heartbeat. She stayed up until 3 a.m., searching frantically online. Tumor symptoms in children. Behavior change plus vision problems. When to go to the ER. Every answer pointed in one direction, but the guilt held her still. The shame of waiting this long. The fear of hearing the words she dreaded most. She didn't sleep. Day 5. Lucas couldn't remember his friend's name. The boy he sat next to every day at school. What's his name again? He asked, chewing his lip. It's something with a D. Dylan, Julia said softly. Yeah. Dylan. His handwriting was shaky. He stopped halfway through a sentence and forgot what he was saying. At lunch, his right hand trembled so badly he couldn't hold his spoon. I think something's wrong with my hand, he said. It doesn't feel like it belongs to me. Julia touched his wrist. Can you squeeze my hand? He tried. The grip was weak, almost non-existent. She didn't wait. She loaded him into the car and drove, past the pediatrician straight, to the ER. But fate had one more cruelty to deliver. Day 6, at 3:17 a.m., Julia was jolted awake by a sound she would never forget for as long as she lived. Lucas was gasping. She rushed into his room. His body was rigid, his arms trembling violently, his eyes rolled back. Foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. Lucas! Lucas! She called 911, her voice shaking, tears already falling. He's having a seizure. My son's having a seizure. The minutes that followed blurred together. The sirens, the flashing lights, the paramedics asking questions she couldn't answer. The gurney being wheeled into the ambulance, the doors slamming shut behind him. She sat in the front passenger seat, clutching her phone, her thoughts racing. This was no longer silent. This was screaming. Lucas lay in the ER, his body limp. His pupils didn't respond properly to light. The doctors ordered an emergency MRI. Julia waited. When the doctor returned with the scans, everything inside her collapsed. There's a mass, he said. We suspect a glioblastoma. It's pressing against several key areas of his brain. Julia's throat closed. We have to operate. Now, she nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. The silent progression was over. Now came the fight for his life. Julia sat alone in the small family waiting room just outside the imaging wing. Her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights above her seemed to echo the mounting pressure inside her skull. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, loud and insistent, refusing to let her forget where she was, or why. She stared blankly at the worn linoleum floor, the speckled blue and white pattern blurring as tears welled in her eyes. The paramedics had taken Lucas for the MRI. They had moved fast, too fast, rushing through the doors while she stumbled behind them, her breath ragged, her mind screaming. Now she was alone with her thoughts, and they were merciless. She covered her mouth with both hands, trying to steady her breathing, but memories flooded her vision, like scenes of a movie she wished she could rewrite. The bump on his head, the first headache, the blurred vision, the way he couldn't find his words. All the signs had been there. Every single one. How had she missed them? Because you didn't want to see, a voice whispered in the back of her mind, her own voice, sharp and unforgiving. She closed her eyes as another memory crashed into her. Lucas standing in the kitchen 3 mornings ago, holding his spoon awkwardly, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "Mom, it feels weird, like it's not my hand." She had smiled, brushed it off, offered him breakfast, and told herself it was just fatigue. You brushed it off. You minimized it. You didn't want it to be real. Her breath hitched. Another memory surfaced, Lucas sitting at the dining table, staring at her with confusion, his young voice timid. "Mom, why are there 2 of you?" Julia pressed her fingers to her eyes hard enough that bright spots appeared in the darkness. "Why didn't I take him to the ER then? Why did I let him go to the science fair? Why did I let him talk me out of it? I'm the parent. I should have known. I should have seen." She remembered the way he had insisted on going to school. He looked so small and earnest, clutching his volcano project with both hands, his smile fragile but proud. "Please, Mom, I worked so hard, just today, please," and she had caved. She had wanted to protect his joy, his routine, his childhood. Instead, she had protected a lie, one that nearly cost him his life. Her tears fell freely now, landing on the back of her trembling hands. She squeezed her fingers into her palms, almost punishing herself with the pressure. She thought of the search history still open on her phone at home. Child bump head cyst harmless, double vision child causes, anger issues sudden preteen, when to go to ER headache. She had looked for reassurance, not truth. I was scared. I was tired. I didn't want it to be anything more. But that doesn't excuse anything. She saw again the moment earlier that morning, Lucas's body rigid, his small frame shaking violently on his bedroom floor. His eyes rolled back, his lips turning pale. His first seizure. Julia squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block the image, but it only grew clearer. She remembered the sound he had made, the awful choking gasp that tore through her like a blade. She remembered screaming his name, shaking, trying to turn him on his side with trembling hands. "Please, Lucas, please look at me." But he couldn't. He wasn't there. Her baby, the boy who used to run into her arms after school, who loved dinosaurs and strawberry milk, who still slipped his hand into hers when crossing the street. He had been trapped inside a terrifying storm his own brain had unleashed, and she hadn't seen the clouds gathering. Julia leaned forward, pressing her forehead to her knees. She felt sick, cold, empty. Every breath was a struggle. What kind of mother lets it get this far? What kind of mother ignores the signs? She whispered aloud, voice cracking, "I should have taken him sooner. Oh God, I should have taken him sooner." The memory of the school nurse calling 3 days ago resurfaced. He was quiet today. He seemed off. "Maybe you could check in on him." And Julia had said, "He's fine, just tired. I'll talk to him later." Later had nearly been too late. Her mind drifted back further, before the headaches, before the double vision, back to the first moment the bump had appeared. Lucas, standing in the bathroom, parting his hair in the mirror. "Mom, I've got something weird on my head." He hadn't been scared then, not even a little. He trusted her to know what to do, to fix it, to keep him safe. And she had smiled and said, "You'll live." Julia's chest tightened so painfully she had to press a hand over her heart. That was the moment, she realized, the moment where everything could have changed, where she could have caught it early, where she could have saved him from days of pain and confusion and fear. But she hadn't. She had been too busy, too distracted, too desperate for it to be something small. And now he lay behind heavy metal doors, surrounded by machines and doctors, his life hanging in the balance, while she sat outside drowning in regret. She lifted her head and stared at the wall in front of her. On it hung a single framed photograph, a calm mountain landscape, serene and undisturbed. Beneath it, someone had written a quote in looping cursive: "The first step toward healing is acknowledging the truth." Julia let out a broken laugh. The truth was brutal. The truth was that her son was fighting for his life because she waited. She didn't know how much time passed before the door opened and the doctor returned. His face was serious, his eyes heavy. "Mrs. Gardner," he said gently, "we have the results." She stood too quickly and almost stumbled. Is Lucas?" "He's stable for now," the doctor said, "but the MRI shows a mass in his right frontal lobe. The swelling is severe. We need to prepare for surgery immediately." She nodded slowly, tears falling silently down her cheeks. The doctor softened his voice. "You couldn't have known," but she shook her head violently. "I should have. I ignored everything, all the signs. I kept brushing it off." "That's normal," he said. "Parents do that because they love their children, because they want them to be okay." Julia's voice cracked open like a wound. "But he wasn't okay." The doctor placed a hand on her shoulder. "What matters now is what we do next." Julia pressed her lips together, steadying her breath as best she could. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and nodded. "Do whatever you have to," she whispered. "Please, save my son." And in that moment, her regret hardened into something else. Not self-hatred, not shame, but resolve. A fierce, unmovable will to fight alongside him, no matter how dark the path ahead became. She would not fail him again. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Lucas was already in the ICU by the time Julia was allowed to see him again. The room was dim, the machines beside his bed blinking and humming in a language she didn't understand but instinctively feared. A plastic oxygen mask covered half his face, and the soft hiss of the ventilator was the only thing that told her he was still breathing. His small body lay unnaturally still. A nurse adjusted the foreline in his arm and nodded politely at her before stepping out of the room, leaving her alone with him. Julia approached slowly, as if afraid her footsteps might disturb some fragile thread holding him here. She reached out and brushed his hair back gently, careful not to touch the swollen area. It had grown, impossibly, terrifyingly so. His skin was stretched tight, the shape beneath it now unmistakable. This wasn't a bump, it was something alive, something invasive. The door opened behind her. Dr. Haskell stepped inside. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a firm voice, dressed in deep blue scrubs and holding a chart under one arm. He paused beside her, glanced at Lucas, then motioned for her to step outside with him. In the hallway, his tone changed. "The MRI confirms the presence of a tumor," he said quietly. "It's a glioblastoma." Julia's lips parted, but no words came out. The word sounded alien. "Final. It's a type of brain cancer," he continued. "Aggressive, fast-growing. The location is particularly concerning. Right frontal lobe, pressing against the motor cortex, language centers, and visual pathways." She blinked at him. "You're saying it's in multiple areas?" He nodded. "It's spreading. The pressure inside his skull is building rapidly. That's why he's been having headaches, vision problems, speech disruptions, behavioral changes. And now, seizures." Julia wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "Can you remove it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We're preparing for surgery," he said. "Our goal is to resect as much of the tumor as possible, but we may not be able to remove all of it." Her eyes widened. "Why not?" "Because of where it is. Some portions are dangerously close to critical brain structures. If we're not careful, removing too much could damage his ability to speak, move, even breathe on his own." Julia's knees went weak. She leaned against the wall for support. Is he going to die?" Dr. Haskell's silence was heavy. "We're going to do everything we can," he said eventually. "We need to act fast. We can't wait until morning. The swelling is already affecting brain function. His last seizure was a sign of escalating intracranial pressure. If it continues, it could lead to brain herniation." Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg time to turn backward. But there was only forward now. "What do you need from me?" "Consent for emergency surgery." He handed her a clipboard with forms. She stared at them, barely seeing the words. Her hands trembled as she signed her name. Again. "How long will it take?" she asked. 6 hours. Maybe longer. And what are his chances? Dr. Haskell met her eyes. "We don't talk about odds at this point. We talk about hope." A choked sob escaped her. She nodded. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go be with him. We'll bring him down in 10 minutes." Julia returned to Lucas's side. The beeping of the monitor had become her new lullaby, a cruel soundtrack to the worst night of her life. She sat in the chair beside his bed, took his cold hand in hers, and held it close to her heart. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "It's okay. I'm here. Mommy's right here." He stirred faintly under her touch, a soft murmur escaping his lips. She leaned in closer. "Mom," he rasped, barely audible. "I'm here," she said again, brushing tears from her cheeks. His eyes fluttered open just enough for her to see them, clouded, unfocused, but searching. "I'm scared," he whispered. Her heart shattered. "I know, baby, I know, but you're not alone. You're so brave. You're going to be okay. The doctors are going to help you. I promise." He blinked slowly. His lips moved again, forming a word she barely heard. "Home." She nodded, gripping his hand tighter. "Yes. When this is all over, we'll go home. We'll watch that dinosaur movie you love. You'll tell me everything I missed. We'll bake cookies, whatever you want, okay?" A tear rolled down his temple. The nurse returned a few minutes later with the surgical team. They moved quickly, efficiently, checking vitals and preparing the gurney. Julia stepped back, letting them work, her entire body numb. As they wheeled Lucas toward the OR, she followed until the double doors stopped her. A nurse turned and gently held up her hand. "This is as far as you can go." Julia pressed her hands against the glass, watching as her son disappeared behind swinging doors. The hallway fell silent. She stood there for a long time, until the lights above seemed to dim and the world itself slowed to a halt. Then, with shaky steps, she walked to the waiting area, back to the same chair where regret had nearly broken her, and now she waited with a new burden. Hope. Not blind hope, but hope born of desperation. Hope that, even in the face of the worst mistake of her life, it wasn't too late to save him. The surgical lights lowered like moons, casting pale rings of sterile light over Lucas's small, unconscious body. He lay still on the operating table, wrapped in thin blue drapes, only his shaved head exposed. A red mark had been drawn with surgical ink, carefully outlining the incision path. Machines beeped steadily, monitors blinked, the hum of life support filled the room like a second heartbeat. Dr. Haskell stood over him, gloved hands poised above the boy's skull. His brow was furrowed, his jaw tight. Around him, the surgical team moved with the choreographed precision of seasoned dancers. Each step, each handoff, each command efficient and exact. "Scalpel," he said. The nurse passed it into his waiting palm. He made the first incision, a delicate, practiced cut just along the hairline. Blood appeared in a thin line. The suction tool whirred softly beside him. Another nurse dabbed the site as he continued the cut in a smooth arc. In the hallway outside, Julia sat in a small alcove with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a rosary wrapped between her fingers, though she hadn't prayed in years. Her foot tapped involuntarily. She couldn't keep still. The OR doors had closed 40 minutes ago. Time had stopped moving. Every minute felt like a lifetime. A nurse passed by. Julia stood up too quickly. "Anything?" she asked. The nurse offered a soft smile. "No updates yet, but no news is good news. He's still in the early stage of surgery." Julia nodded, but her heart didn't believe it. She returned to her chair. The silence roared around her. Back inside the OR, Dr. Haskell had opened the skull. The bone flap was carefully lifted, revealing the delicate tissue beneath. He paused, studying the brain's surface. "There," he said, pointing to a swelling along the right frontal lobe. The tumor was embedded deep in the tissue, grayish, invasive, wrapped around critical areas like a vine choking its host. "Looks like it's encroaching on the motor cortex," the neurologist said from behind the screen. "We need to proceed carefully. One slip and we lose speech or movement." Dr. Haskell nodded. "We'll go slow. Millimeter by millimeter." He began the delicate dissection. The team worked in silence, the only sound the rhythmic beeping and the soft suction of tools. A single drop of sweat rolled down his temple. Meanwhile, Julia stared at the floor, her mind replaying Lucas's voice. "Mom, why are there two of you? My hand feels sleepy. If I die, can I be buried next to Grandpa?" She gripped the rosary tighter, fighting the scream rising in her throat. Her stomach churned. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A second nurse walked by. "Would you like some water?" she offered gently. Julia nodded, took the cup with shaky hands and whispered, "Thank you." Inside the OR, the team encountered the first complication. Bleeding, the attending nurse announced. Vessel nicked. Clamp, Dr. Haskell ordered, his voice calm but sharp. They controlled it quickly, but the tension in the room doubled. He continued, removing pieces of the tumor with painstaking care. His hands never trembled. His eyes never blinked longer than a second. 2 hours passed, then 3. Outside, Julia sat with her head in her hands, rocking gently. She whispered to herself, not prayers, but fragments of memories, first steps, that blue dinosaur pajamas, the way he said Brussels sprouts. She pressed her fist to her forehead. Please, please don't take him from me. A nurse finally appeared, clipboard in hand. Julia leapt to her feet. He's still in surgery, the nurse said. They've removed part of the tumor, but it's more invasive than expected. They're proceeding slowly to avoid damage to his speech and motor functions. Julia nodded numbly. Thank you. The nurse hesitated. He's holding on. That's what matters. Back in the OR, Dr. Haskell had stopped speaking. He was deep in the most dangerous part of the tumor, where it curled dangerously close to the basal ganglia and language centers. One wrong move, and Lucas might wake up without the ability to speak, walk, or even recognize his own mother. Let's pause, he said quietly. The room stilled. He studied the monitor carefully, consulted the neuro map projected on the screen beside him. If we go deeper here, he whispered to his assistant, we risk permanent paralysis. If we leave it, the tumor could grow back in weeks. He closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them, steady again. We go. Carefully. Outside, Julia had dozed off for a moment, forehead resting on the wall. She dreamt of Lucas running down the hallway, calling out to her with that laugh, the one that always lit up the whole house. When she opened her eyes, the hallway was empty. Her chest ached. Another hour passed. Inside the OR, the team was closing. Dr. Haskell stepped back, finally pulling away from the microscope. His gloves were soaked, his shoulders sagged slightly, but his eyes were alert. We got most of it, he said. How much? The neurologist asked. Approximately 80%. The rest is too embedded. We'll need chemo, radiation. But he made it through. Applause didn't erupt. There were no cheers, just a collective breath of relief. Attention broken. They closed the skull, sutured the scalp, cleaned the area. In the waiting room, Julia saw the doors open and stood before the doctor even spoke. Dr. Haskell removed his cap, wiped his brow. He's stable, he said. Julia's legs gave out beneath her, but she didn't fall. She grabbed the wall, covered her mouth, and sobbed with every fiber of her being. You got it? She gasped. Most of it, he said. He's not out of the woods yet, but he's alive, and he's a fighter. She nodded through tears. Can I see him? Soon. He'll be in recovery for a while. But yes, you'll see him soon. Julia lowered herself into the chair and covered her face with her hands. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was something like hope. The recovery room was dim and quiet, lit only by a soft lamp in the corner, and the faint glow of medical monitors beside the bed. The harshness of the operating theater was gone, replaced by something gentler, something that tried to mimic safety. Julia stood in the doorway for a long moment, her breath caught somewhere between hope and terror. Lucas lay on the bed, his head wrapped in fresh white bandages, a thick line of sutures hidden beneath them. He looked impossibly small against the wide hospital mattress, dwarfed by blankets and machines. For a flicker of a moment, she was afraid to move, afraid that stepping closer would break the illusion that he had survived, afraid he would disappear. She blinked. A nurse touched her arm softly. You can go in. He's still asleep, but he'll need you here when he wakes. Julia nodded, wiped the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, and stepped inside. The beeping of the monitor was steady, stronger than before. His chest rose and fell rhythmically. There was color in his cheeks again. Not much, but enough to remind her he was still here, still fighting. She took his hand, carefully, gently, and held it between both of hers. Hey baby, she whispered. Mom's right here. I'm not going anywhere. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, commenting on his stability. Julia barely noticed. She watched Lucas's face like one might watch a sunrise, waiting for the first signs of life. A twitch, a breath, anything. It was nearly dawn when Lucas stirred. His eyelids fluttered, weak and slow, then opened halfway. His gaze was unfocused at first, blurry and distant. Julia sat up straighter. Lucas, honey, can you hear me? His eyes drifted toward her. They didn't lock onto her, not completely, but they were trying. He moved his lips. Nothing came out. Julia leaned forward, brushing his bangs from his forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart. You just woke up. You had surgery. You're safe." He tried again, jaw trembling slightly. His throat tightened, a small whisper of air escaping, but still, no words. The nurse, who had been checking the 4-line, stepped closer. It might take him some time. The tumor affected the language center. Julia nodded, swallowing her fear. "Can you squeeze my hand, baby?" She placed her fingers lightly between his. Lucas stared, confused by the request, then attempted to move his right hand. Nothing happened. His brow furrowed. He tried again. Still nothing. Julia felt her heart drop into her stomach. He moved his left hand instead. Slow, shaky, but responsive. His fingers curled weakly around hers. "Good job," she whispered, kissing his knuckles. "That's okay, sweetie. That's okay. One step at a time." Lucas blinked, his eyes filling with something between fear and shame. "It's not your fault," she said quickly, her voice suddenly fierce. "Nothing that's happening is your fault." He blinked again, and a tear slipped down his cheek. The nurse adjusted the blanket at his feet. "The right side weakness is expected. The motor cortex was compressed for too long. It may improve with therapy." Julia nodded, her chin trembling. "And his speech? We'll have a speech specialist work with him. It's possible he'll regain much of it with time." "Possible," Julia echoed, clinging to the word like it was oxygen. Lucas drifted in and out of sleep over the next several hours. Each time he opened his eyes, Julia was there, smiling, stroking his hair, talking softly even if he couldn't answer. By the second day, he could sit up with assistance. By the third, he could manage a few sips of water. By the fourth, he could whisper. Just one word, breathy and broken. "Mom." Julia nearly collapsed from relief. She pressed her forehead to his and cried, her tears mixing with his. "I'm here," she whispered again and again. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Therapists began coming in shortly after. A physical therapist named Aaron worked with Lucas to move his right arm. Each session was slow and painful. Little movements, gentle stretches, coaxing muscles that had forgotten how to respond. "Lift, Lucas. Just a little. We're not asking for much." He tried. Some days the effort produced nothing at all. Some days he managed a tiny twitch. Julia watched every session, holding her breath until her chest ached. Speech therapy was harder. Lucas's voice was thin, hesitant. Words got tangled somewhere between his brain and his mouth, coming out in fragments. Water. "Mom, I tried. Hurts." The hardest part wasn't the words. It was the frustration in his eyes. The knowledge that the words existed in his head but could not escape. One evening, after a long session, Lucas pushed away his flashcards, tears of anger streaming down his face. "I'm dumb," he whispered, the words slurred. Julia grabbed his hands. No, Lucas, you're not dumb. You're brave. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. This is hard, yes, but you're not broken." He shook his head weakly. "I used to talk fast." "Yes," Julia said softly, "and you will again. But right now, your brain is healing. It needs time." He stared at her, doubtful. She smiled. "Remember when you broke your wrist falling off your skateboard? You couldn't tie your shoes for a month. But you healed. You learned again. This is the same thing, just inside your head instead of your arm." He blinked, considering it. Then he whispered, "Try again." Julia kissed his forehead. "That's my boy." Day by day, improvement came in the smallest of victories. A clearer word, a straighter step, a slight lift of the right arm, a moment of laughter, quiet, strained, but real. Julia stayed by his side through it all. She slept on the hospital recliner, curled awkwardly under thin blankets. Her back ached, her eyes burned, but she never complained. Visitors came, her sister, her parents, a neighbor from down the street. They brought flowers and stuffed animals and meals Julia often forgot to eat. But every time someone told her she was strong, she shook her head. "No, he's the strong one." After 2.5 weeks, Lucas took his first shaky steps with a walker. Julia clapped her hands, her smile bright and wet with tears. "You did it," she cheered. Lucas leaned heavily on the handles, his legs trembling. "I almost fell. But you didn't," she said, wiping his forehead. "That's what matters. The therapists celebrated each milestone, but privately, they warned Julia that recovery from a glioblastoma was unpredictable. Some functions might never fully return. The tumor could grow back. The road ahead would be long. She didn't care. All she cared about was that he was alive. Lucas returned home a month later. The house felt different, quieter, heavier, but also sacred. Julia walked him through each room as if introducing him to a world he'd been away from for years. "Here's your room," she said, opening the door. Lucas smiled weakly at the dinosaur posters on the walls. He touched the stuffed T-Rex on his pillow. "Missed him," he said, the sentence slow but whole. Julia laughed, tears in her eyes. "He missed you too." They settled into a new rhythm, mornings filled with therapy appointments, afternoons spent practicing writing with his left hand, evenings with audiobooks, because reading still made him dizzy. Some days were good, some were devastating. There were moments he sobbed from frustration when his right hand refused to move, moments he tried to say a sentence and gave up halfway, burying his face in his palms, moments he clung to Julia, shaking, whispering, "I don't want to go back to the hospital," and every time she held him tight and whispered, "You're safe, we're doing this together." One night, weeks into therapy, Lucas crawled into her bed, something he hadn't done since he was 6. He lay quietly beside her, his small hand in hers. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart. Why? Didn't you take me sooner?" The question pierced her like a blade. She turned to him, heart pounding. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "I didn't want it to be something serious. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong." Lucas stared at her with those deep, gentle eyes. "I forgive you." Julia's breath caught. She cupped his face in her hands and kissed his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Lucas." For the first time since the nightmare began, the weight on her chest eased, not gone but lighter. As the weeks turned into months, progress continued, not miraculous, but steady. Lucas learned to form sentences again. He regained partial strength in his right hand. He walked without assistance. He laughed, fully, loudly, at a movie one evening, and Julia cried quietly beside him because she had missed that sound more than anything. The scar on his head healed into a thin line, barely visible under his growing hair. The tumor wasn't gone. He would still need chemo, radiation, scans every few months, but he was here, alive, and every morning, when Julia opened her eyes and saw him sitting at the kitchen table, carefully buttering his toast with his left hand, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Her boy had been pulled back from the edge, and she would spend the rest of her life fighting to keep him here. Months passed, seasons changed, the air grew colder, leaves falling from the maple tree in the front yard, carpeting the ground in shades of amber and gold. And every morning, Julia thanked the quiet of the new day. Lucas, now 10.5, had returned to a version of his life that was forever changed, but still beautiful. His speech had improved, though there were still pauses, stumbles, little hesitations that reminded Julia of how far they'd come. He could now hold a pencil again, with his left hand, and was proud of the crooked letters he wrote in his notebook. He still had to visit the hospital every few weeks for scans. He still had to lie very still while machines buzzed around his head. He still had a long road ahead, but he was here. He was alive. One night, as Julia tucked him into bed, he looked up at her and said something she would never forget. "Mom, if I hadn't told you about the bump, would I still be here?" The room went still. Julia sat beside him, stroking his hand. She didn't lie. She didn't sugarcoat. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe, maybe not. But what I do know is that you were brave enough to tell me, and that's what saved you." Lucas nodded slowly. "But you didn't believe me at first." Her eyes filled with tears. "No, I didn't, and that's something I'll always carry with me." He took her hand. "It's okay. You stayed with me. You helped me fight." She couldn't speak. She only leaned down and kissed his forehead, breathing in the warmth of his skin, the very proof that miracles weren't always loud. Sometimes they were small, slow, and hard-won. If you are a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, or just someone who loves a child, please listen to what I'm about to say. Don't ignore the small signs. Don't brush off the quiet warnings. Sometimes, what looks like just a headache, just a bump, or just stress, is something much more dangerous beneath the surface. Julia almost waited too long. She saw the signs, but life was loud, life was busy. She told herself what so many of us tell ourselves: it's probably nothing. But sometimes nothing turns into everything. Here are 8 warning signs Julia didn't fully recognize until it was almost too late. 1. Unusual headaches. Worsening in the morning. Pain increases when lying down or during movement. 2. Speech difficulties. Struggling to find words. Slurred or incomplete sentences. Trouble following conversations. 3. Seizures. Jerking movements. Strange smells or visual distortions. Loss of consciousness. 4. Vision problems. Double vision. Blurred or partial blindness. Sudden light sensitivity. 5. Personality or behavior changes. Sudden anger or emotional swings. Apathy or acting not like themselves. 6. Memory and focus issues. Forgetting names or routines. Difficulty concentrating or planning simple tasks. 7. Weakness or numbness on one side. Trouble using one arm or leg. Tingling that doesn't go away. 8. Loss of balance or coordination. Trouble walking straight. Difficulty writing, holding objects, or buttoning clothes. These are not just symptoms, these are calls for attention. The brain doesn't shout, it whispers. You have to be quiet enough to hear it. Julia's story is not just one of regret, it's a story of redemption, a story of second chances, a story that reminds us that being afraid is human, but acting despite fear is what saves lives. If you've ever hesitated to call the doctor, ever delayed making an appointment, ever convinced yourself that everything is fine, this is your sign not to wait, because sometimes waiting steals the time we cannot get back. Lucas is a fighter. He wakes up each day with a little more strength, a little more light in his eyes. His scars, visible and invisible, are reminders of the battle he survived. And Julia still carries the guilt, yes, but she also carries a fire. She speaks at schools now. She talks to other parents in waiting rooms. She tells them what she almost learned too late. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. You may never face a brain tumor. You may never have to sit in a hospital waiting room praying for your child to survive. But maybe, just maybe, this story will make you pause the next time you see a subtle change in someone you love. Maybe it will give you the courage to say, let's get it checked anyway. And maybe one day it will save a life. If you've experienced something similar, an unexpected diagnosis, a moment when your intuition saved the day, share your story in the comments. It might help someone more than you know. If this story opened your eyes or touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more real stories that could make a difference. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories don't just entertain, they educate, they warn, they heal, and sometimes they save lives.